It's been roughly a year and a half since I posted the mystery of Project Ura. Afterwards, I had posted that I hope the next video I make doesn't take 2 months like that one did. A very, very long 2 months later, and I've made something of a return. So today, I wanted to revisit Project Ura, because over the last while I've come across some new information in relation to some things I had brought up in my original video, and I would like to correct and share the information that I have gathered. So let's not waste too much time and get right into the swing of things. So to begin the video, I'd like to just issue some corrections to various smaller details I got wrong or that I had misrepresented in my original video. Anticipating that the 64 disk drive would become a commercial failure. Throughout the section, I state that Nintendo expected the 64 disk drive to be a commercial failure, and I feel it implies that they had absolutely no faith in the product at all. But that's not entirely true. Before the release of the N64, when they were planning to sell the 64 disk drive alongside the base console, they were very hopeful. But as the delays kept happening, they had been finding it increasingly difficult to promote. Only after it had launched in Japan would Nintendo start anticipating that it would be a commercial failure, in which they had begun selling it primarily through the RANDnet starter pack, and in even more limited quantities of both console and game in stores. There were some people saying in the comments of that video that Nintendo should have released it in the West anyways, and I agree, as I would love to have one. But it would have been an incredibly risky move to promote and market something in a foreign land when it didn't even do that well in their own homeland. The NES only sold so well in America because Nintendo was able to promote the consoles to other investors on the basis that it did incredibly well in Japan, and when they had tested the waters in American arcades, it had also exploded in popularity. So the idea of the home console NES was obvious. They could have attempted the same trick, but with such a limited range of games, most of them being creative suites, it'd be rather hard to convince a general populace to invest in an add-on to only play a handful of games at the time. Due to very few people buying the starter kit, they were either ported to another console. Here I say that games planned for the 64 disk drive had one of three possible fates. One of the fates was being ported to a, typically, more powerful console. In the small selection of games, I had shown Dragon Quest VII, Final Fantasy VII, and Seaman. Seaman was originally intended for the 64 disk drive, but was quickly changed to the Dreamcast when the game's producer, Yu Saito, had met with the then vice president of Sega, Soichiro Irimajiri, who believed that Seaman, along with the Dreamcast's microphone attachment, could make the Dreamcast a market leader, further proof that we live in the darkest timeline. Dragon Quest VII, on the other hand, was intended for the 64 disk drive. Enix, not acquired by Square at the time, had seen the larger potential market for the PlayStation, as well as the cheaper production costs of CDs as the most viable option. Despite the few delays it had after switching the platform, it would become one of the best Dragon Quest games of all time. Final Fantasy VII, however, was never considered for development on the 64 disk drive. The clip that gets shared around as proof of Final Fantasy 64 was an interactive battle demo of Final Fantasy VI characters created for the SIGGRAPH exhibition. Which, by the way, Final Fantasy 64 is what people speculate to be the original Final Fantasy VII. Which is an annual conference on computer graphics. The demo was produced using new Silicon Graphics Inc., Onyx, and Indy 2 workstations acquired by Square. The 3D models were made in Alias Power Animator and animated in Softimage 3D at 15 FPS. It was a fully tangible game that was never intended to see a proper release of any kind. Anyways, at the time Square wasn't dead set on any specific 5th gen console, but were strongly leaning towards CD-ROMs due to the Final Fantasy VI battle demo being 20 megabytes big. A typical N64 cart and the 64 disk drive magnetic disc only holds about 64 megabytes each. I think. The wording around it is very confusing to me. In contrast, the CD-ROM can hold upwards of 650 megabytes. With this in mind, it became very clear that with the story and ideas that they had planned, only the CD-ROM would suffice. Even then, they had to split Final Fantasy VII into 3 separate discs. But if they had gone the route of 64 disk drive, it would have taken roughly 30 of the 64 disk drive discs to contain all of the content that they wanted. The Final Fantasy VI demo would help lead the art team towards the unique and surreal direction used in Final Fantasy VII, especially during its CGI cutscenes, helping it stand out to its contemporaries in the RPG genre. The footage shared earlier came from the bonus disc from the international version of Final Fantasy VII called Final Fantasy VII Perfect Guide, under the Making of section.
Sorry for the big long tangent about both Final Fantasy VII and computer hardware. I'm just a really big nerd for both of them.
The story of the game was planned to have been set during the events of Majora's Mask, since Hyrule was without their beloved Hero of Time due to him being in Termina. Another hero was chosen to rise and defeat the menace that was causing dismay in the land of Hyrule. This hero would be titled the Hero of Light, as a large theme of this game was light versus dark. Some people pointed out that the explanation I gave about Ura Zelda's timeline didn't make any sense. As, yeah, I didn't explain it well. The most important thing to know is that the game takes place in its own timeline, being relatively the same up until Link goes to Termina. Basically, after the events of Ocarina of Time, Link travels back to his own time, when he was a kid, and runs off into a forest where he falls down a hole and winds up in Termina. 2 years after, Link still hasn't returned and a new evil has arisen. Thusly, a new hero must be chosen to stop this force, being the new Hero of Light. This is where Project Ura takes place. Ura takes place in its own timeline as to not contradict or interfere with official Zelda canon, which apparently gets rewritten whenever a new Zelda game comes out. During the course of development, many screenshots were uploaded to the Project Ura website, allowing the community There was some minor controversy on the gaming collective network regarding musician Punk7890's contributions. Many followers and fans were split on liking and hating the songs Punk had made. The majority of the criticism being that Punk wasn't using the Ocarina of Time sound font, unlike the other musician, Nitro Flash. According to an old friend of mine, the music Punk7890 had made sounds different due to what they describe as the genre and vibe being way different, and that they noticed right away that the instruments and time signature were not following the theme of Ocarina of Time. They're someone who's been dabbling in music their entire life, as well as being a lifelong N64 Zelda fan. Suffice to say, I take their opinion on the matter with a fair bit of credibility. I'm not a music person, it's all just noise to me. I like music, it sounds good, but I can't comprehend the intricacies of the process. So just take it as food for thought. Hey guys, future editor Brett here. So in the original video, I had said that a large criticism was that the songs he made didn't sound like Ocarina of Time. And that's just not the case. I had wrongly assumed something was wrong with the way the songs were done, and so did my friend that I brought up a little bit ago. The actual issue people were having was with the quality of the sound font used. So to make a long story short, Punk7890 had made the sound font that the team was using to make the tracks. He had ripped them directly from Ocarina of Time. Due to the limited space of N64 cartridges, the music had to be compressed, which was great at the time, but around the early 2010s it was sounding a bit dated. At some point during Project Ura's development, Punk had purchased a Roland MIDI sound module, the same one Koji Kondo used to compose Ocarina of Time. So now Punk had access to the exact same sounds, but without the compression of the N64. And he soon made a new sound font for the team to work from, one a bit more higher quality. However, for consistency, Nitro Flash continued to use the original one Punk had made from directly ripping from Ocarina of Time. Which, by the way, Zeth was kind enough to create a quick little sample of the differences between the two. If you listen closely, you can hear a slight hiss on the N64 music sample, while the Roland sample doesn't have that hiss. That hiss is from compression. That I know from working with my own audio for these videos from the last few years. A little experimenting goes a long way. So, basically, a large part of the music issue was that the community preferred the compressed sound font over the uncompressed sound font. Another issue was that Nitroflash was trying to emulate Koji Kondo's composing style, while Punk wanted to do his own thing. Which, now knowing this, I feel is justified for Punk to do so, as Project Ura was becoming less of a one-to-one restoration mod for Ura Zelda, and becoming its own unique thing. Having a composer create music separate from the design and composing style of the original game feels natural. Just as some food for thought, a lot of game composers at the time would use sound fonts pre-compressed for whatever they were working with, to help prevent compression from ruining any music or creating any weird sounds. Thanks to Zeth for chatting with me about this because, yet again, he provided me with a lot of new, useful information that really clears the air on a lot of the more obscure and unknown parts of Project Ura, as well as teaching me a few things about N64 technology and music. Zeth and Shadowfire would strongly defend Punk, while Spire would go against the team and for it. I managed to scout out an active account of Zeth to see if he wanted to do an interview for this video. He declined on the basis of, it brings up a lot of bad memories about not seeing the project's completion, and that he doesn't really care what people think. It's not worth the effort anyways. Hey wait, I actually have some news about this. Zeth himself had sent me a message over Twitter about my Ura Zelda video, and that he'd be open to any questions I may have about it. In February 2022, Zeth messaged me on Twitter apologizing for coming off as abrasive and cold when I had first contacted him, as he wasn't in the best place at the time, to which I have absolutely no hard feelings about, as the world was in a rough place at the time itself, and I had messaged him under the assumption that it wouldn't have been acknowledged in the first place. So I took some time to re-watch, re-research, and re-analyze the available information about Project Ura, and wrote up a bunch of questions relating to the development itself, to the inner conflicts of the team, and Zeth.
I'm not gonna lie to you guys, this had kinda blindsided me when it happened, as I had long since misplaced all of my documents revolving around Project Ura. So I largely had to base my questions on the information I had provided in my video and also in my sources.
What was the original goal of Project Ura? A fan game, or a restoration of a speculative expansion to Ocarina of Time?
A fan game. It was never meant to be a restoration. At the time the project was being worked on, there was almost zero knowledge about the expansion itself. We didn't take information from wikis or websites, we looked for magazines over in Japan, and Shadowfire helped us translate some of them. The closest we got to an answer was that it was going to be similar to Master Quest, based on how these interviews were described.
A slight point of contention during the project's life was an elusive Trailer 3, many saying that it never existed or that you had nothing really to show for it, and so it kept being teased as sort of bait for everyone to continue supporting and following it. Anyways, what I wanted to ask, did Trailer 3 ever exist? If so, do you still have it? Would you be willing to post it?
I think that's where a lot of confusion comes from. We weren't making a trailer? That last bit is the easiest part. We were making a fan game mod. We had setbacks we couldn't ignore and had to take care of, but people were upset that there wasn't evidence enough that we weren't working enough. I admit my fault in this. I caved into that pressure and posted screenshots of upcoming content. Even released a gameplay preview of the Ice Palace entrance. That was the content that was going to be in Trailer 3.
Did switching from the Ocarina of Time engine to the Majora's Mask engine cause any issues with already created work for the game, such as textures and models? Did you have to start anything from the beginning?
No, this didn't. I never understood some of the team's comments afterwards, how they were upset they would have to start over. It really never made any sense. A lot of my work regarding animations, restorations that were Ocarina of Time specific, took a hit, but I knew I could bring it into Majora's Mask's engine. Myself, Naxeldrick, and Archaith were all 3D modelers for the project. We had the source files of the stuff we created, and that can be ported into Majora's Mask just fine. The only real issue was stuff Sakura did for the file select in Rupee Wallet, since that was code-specific. Which, by the way, I'd gotten her blessing to proceed before the option to move to Majora's Mask's engine was even presented to the rest of the team. You'd also be surprised that if you find something in Ocarina of Time, you can find a similar counterpart in Majora's Mask. The only other person had to be Crooked Poe, who, at the time I knew as Nick. He was in charge of porting Majora's Mask Link to Ocarina of Time, but he was struggling a lot with getting this done, to the point he had given up because of how hard it was proving. With us switching to Majora's Mask, this was no longer needed, and he could focus on the stuff he could do. The music being made wasn't going to change between engines, so the only thing left was beta testers. So again, this weird rumor that moving to the engine threw away months of work was just silly.
Various places around the web claim wildly varying states the game was at by cancellation. Some say 80%, others say only 50%. Do you recall how close to completion Project Ura was?
The percentage did fluctuate, like you say, though they are from very different time periods. The original design when we first started Ura was to remake the Master Quest dungeons, add a couple additional dungeons, Wind and Ice, and call it good. That's where the 80% comes from. There was a poll put out on the GCN for the community to take part in to see which direction they wanted us to go. At the time, some of the team members were not too thrilled about a remake of Master Quest, and wanted new dungeons. Something I wish they'd brought up a lot sooner instead of when we were getting close to being finished. We left the project's fate in the community's hands, and a lot of people voted for the new dungeons. The old Ura project website at the time was updated with this change, as well as announcements made during the time. We had completed about 50% of the new content we needed. One of the biggest factors that came into play was the engine Ocarina of Time used. During our Castletown test, we noticed huge lag spikes that would slow down gameplay. Since Majora's Mask is a more optimized engine, and it takes full advantage of the full megabyte expansion pack, I ran it by our programmer Sakura if it was a good idea. She agreed to it, and I did a test that evening, talking with the team about it. The test was successful and the lagged areas were non-existent. We agreed switching to the new engine would benefit the project a lot. This was later updated on the website, and the percentage was not able to be given because of the change. We didn't want to mislead people about how far progress was because there was still a lot to be done.
At several points during my research, it seemed like as soon as you and the team were set to release the infamous Trailer 3, a tragic and serious event would coincidentally happen then and there. Examples being, Zeth was hit by a car, and an extended family member had passed, or a hard drive containing trailer stuff had corrupted. Were these events coincidental, or was there another reason you had brought these to light right when you were expected to deliver new information?
When it's put like that, yeah, it sounds pretty bad, but there's a lot more context missing and of course, time placement. People were expecting Trailer 3 right after Trailer 2 was released. There was a lot of impatience on the community's part regarding it. Constant bombardment when the next trailer was. While I understood their excitement, it put a lot of pressure on a team who were doing this out of their spare time. The team and I kept telling them, we'll release Trailer 3 when we are ready. What people don't seem to realize is that we had people on the forums complaining. It's not really coming, it's not happening. Even someone posted in the comments of our Ura project site, claiming to be Sakura, that the project wasn't real and Trailer 3 wasn't coming. Sakura was really pissed about that, by the way. During that time, I'd gotten off the public transit getting my check from work. I had crossed the road and was heading home. Looked both ways, and it was clear as I was crossing the next street where my apartment complex was. This lady in a red car literally sped around the corner and hit me, never stopped and just kept going. My glasses flew off, I'm knocked off the road into the grass, my phone was shattered, I had bruised ribs from where I was hit. This same lady almost hit my roommate a few days later, who luckily not only got out of the way, but got her license plate so we could report it. We had not just one but multiple hard drive failures to deal with. Sakura accidentally spilt water on her laptop, which refused to boot after that. She was communicating with the team via the Wii for a bit, and later on running Linux off a thumbstick. My hard drive failed close to the same time, and it was difficult to find a replacement. The Thailand tsunami happened, which created a huge shortage for hard drives. People were worried about the trailer when I just lost a good portion of work, maps I will never get back. That's something they will never understand, how much that can put someone behind. How disheartening it is to lose all the hard work you put in for absolutely nothing. Thankfully, Naxel Drit had some of it, so not all was lost. We were having to rebuild, keep moving forward after it, and that takes time. The last bit about losing my brother's family happened in December, just before the project fell apart. I lost people close to me, and I'll admit it, I was not in a good place mentally. I lost interest in a lot of stuff. I wasn't around. I was in shock and trying to move forward. I had Ben messaging me almost daily trying to get me to work on the project when I honestly wanted time to come to terms with what even happened. These didn't happen one right after another. There was a lot of time between all of these events, and yeah, it sucks a fan project trailer got delayed, but shit happens in real life that takes far more precedence than a fan mod.
Spire had made many allegations towards you, such that he had to wait for Trailer 3 to see progress, and that you had lied about the game existing at all, and that you would hire new team members, persuade them with outdated or old work, and then do nothing more. Is any of this true, or was this a big, heat-of-the-moment burst of anger? Essentially, what is your side to the story if you can recall?
Ah, yes. I remember Spire's rant. It was like a child throwing a fit, spouting whatever untrue nonsense he could just to damage and hurt the project just because he didn't get his way. People believing him that it wasn't real was kind of mind-boggling because we did have videos and screenshots of the work we posted. I never understood how that could suddenly be a hoax. Let me be blunt. Spire wanted to control this project. There was a point during the first time he joined that he bullied me to the point where I was even showing offline for a bit. I had made a secondary Skype account just to avoid the constant harassment he was constantly dishing out. He caused a lot of infighting, rifts, etc. in the team, to the point we had to kick him out. After several months he asked to rejoin, admitting his mistakes and how wrong he was for how he acted. I talked with the team regarding Spire's request and we came up with a solution. Based on how he acted and if he really was going to join back up, he was not going to be in the main group anymore. He was going to deal directly with me via IMs. I'd ask him specifically what I wanted, and that's how the exchange would go. He agreed to these terms. He lost his privilege to be a part of the discussion because he can't act appropriately. Spire was never satisfied with his role as a concept artist, and to this day, it was my mistake I made letting him back on the team. This would be true with other projects he joined up later on afterwards. The Antiqua project, Sakura's own personal project, and even Third Quest. Someone who knew Spire very well, a friend he introduced the forums to, and later was a member of Antiqua, sent a message to the Ura team after its cancellation.
Might I first say that I'm deeply apologetic about the cancellation of Ura. I feel slightly guilty about the entire thing because I feel I could have warned you about Spire before it was too late. Of course, you'd probably not believe me back when he was actually working on the project. I have known Spire on a professional level for years. He's a creative genius in his own way. He has a way to really excite teams into accepting his agenda. People become excessively dependent on him and his ideas. Unfortunately, he cannot stand simply being a concept artist, and connives and threatens his way to the top. He is a death sentence to every project he has ever joined. I have worked with Spire on thousands of projects, and not one of them have survived. He destroys them all. He either loses interest and leaves a project, or he gets into an argument because you don't agree with his agenda and takes back all his work. I'm sorry that this has happened to Ura as well, and I'm afraid it will happen to other projects in the future. The decision to cancel Ura was probably based on other problems as well, but I still want to apologize. I should have warned you. P.S. Don't tell Spire.
In my video, one of the two conclusions I had come to was that Spire was the indirect cause of the project's cancellation due to having many public and private arguments with the team. The other conclusion I came to was that everyone on the team was not nearly experienced enough to take on a project like this yet, due to seeing that most people a part of it had a different vision from each other for what they wanted it to be. Why do you feel the project came to an end?
Don't get me wrong. Spire was a big part of the problems we faced, but there were mistakes I made as well as several issues within the team itself. I should have never brought Spire back onto the team after the trouble we had with him the first time around where we had to kick him out. The second part, I should have never have played into Shadowfire's joke to let Blinks onto the team. Blinks was only a beta tester, but he had several confrontations on the forum with several members. It got so bad we had to literally ban him from the GCN. The third was I should have never let the community get involved or have as much say over the project as it did. People need to understand we're not professional game devs. We didn't have access to source code or great tools or decomp projects like there are now. We were having to be pioneers digging into this content. It takes time. A lot of time. I wish I stressed that more back then. The last issue was regarding Naxeldrit. After his ex broke up with him, he became closed off, jaded, angry, and he took it out on the project, myself, and those around him. I had encouraged him and Sakura to get together since they had seemed to hit it off, and hoped that it would be better for the both of them. Sadly, that backfired badly as he used it to force her off the project.
On the archive.org post for the Urizelda fan project screenshots, you, or someone claiming to be you, state that the project files were leaked by someone who is not you. You wouldn't happen to know who, would you?
No, I have no idea to be honest who uploaded that, as I didn't upload them myself. I can tell you from looking over the files that are uploaded to archive.org that there are some project files uploaded which were released by Shadowfire back on the GCN after Ura's cancellation, but the rest is from someone else's work not related to the team.
Approximately how much of the community's input had played a role in the direction and development of Urizelda?
If you read through my answers, you probably know already. A lot, and it put a lot of pressure on myself and the team.
Did you delete everything in a fit of rage like the rumors had foretold?
Only my YouTube channel, and it wasn't in a fit of rage. I was done with modding. I was done with the community after everything I gave, the free time I gave up over 3 years on this project. I was so stressed out, I was constantly in the hospital to the point my doc told me to knock off this stress or it was going to kill me. So I did exactly that. I went dark, disappeared from everything, everyone, and gave myself time not only to grieve my loss of my family, but friends, people I used to talk to, and the project I put my heart and soul into.
How do you feel you did when leading and working on the project? Any pressure from the community? Any pressure you put on yourself? Do you feel you've learned something from the project?
I could have done better as a leader, been more assertive about things as well as not giving into the sway of the community. I should have stayed firm about that stupid donation button that I never wanted. Let me repeat that again. I never wanted that donation button. The community and the team pressured me into it, and that became this running criticism of this whole project, that I was like a villain laughing maniacally as I'd swoop in to steal donations from people. It was a donation button. No one was forced into it. No one got sneak previews for donating. It was just there to show your appreciation if you wanted to. No one was ever required to donate. And guess what? Most of those donations went to Shadowfire because he was hosting our project. When the project was cancelled, I had pocket linked my name. I did put a lot of pressure on myself since I never took breaks. It was work, come home, work on the project, sleep, repeat the process for almost 3 years. On rare occasions I took time to game, but it was back to working on the project. I burnt myself out, especially after the hard drive failure, and we lost so much data. I literally cried, hours gone in an instant, over a mechanical failure I had no control over, and yet I put that pressure on myself. I felt like a failure to the community, to the team, to everyone. I literally pushed myself to try and make up for the lost content. I realize now that it was silly to put that pressure on myself like that. But people grow, they change, they learn, and they can become better than what they used to be.
How do you feel knowing you have a special place in Zelda history as one of the first people to try and remake Ura Zelda?
Despite the bad that came from the project, there's been a lot of good too. I've had people thank me for even attempting the project in the first place. They said it inspired them to get into 3D modeling or modding games. That made me happy to hear that, if anything.
What advice do you have for anyone wanting to get into modding Ocarina of Time, or even game development in general?
Remember, you're human. The people you work with are human. A fan project isn't worth pushing yourself constantly to the point you're burning yourself out. Take time, take breaks, and remember the project is supposed to be fun. When it stops being fun, then reevaluate and take a break. Come back to it later. There's no set time limit of when you should finish it, and don't let anyone pressure you to do so. P.S. Always make backups in case of hardware failure.
Lastly, have you seen my video about it? What are some of your thoughts?
I did, and it made me decide to reach out. I felt you were pretty fair with your analysis despite not hearing my side of things. It made me want to give my side of the story, so thank you for that.
Is there anything you are currently working on that you would be okay with me promoting?
Please promote the Ura expansion mod. It is completed. This is the real deal, what the real Ura Zelda was going to be like. This data came directly from the Giga Leak. While there weren't enough system files to build an official disc, it did contain a file list of the files required to build the disc as well as the dungeon layouts, meant to be on the disc. The repo date for these dungeon layouts predate Master Quest's final version of the files. These are the original Master Quest layouts. While the ROM version is definitely the definitive way to play it, with some enhancements such as faster text scrolling, I worked with Luigi Blood to even make a disc version so you can play it pretty legitly, and it works on official 64 disk drive hardware if you have a Blue Disc dev unit. The disc version does work on emulator and works on all 3 N64 NTSC ROMs, no patching required. I hope everyone will enjoy it. It's very challenging and was made by myself, Sakura, Shadowfire, and Too Cool from the original Ura team. Final note regarding the project, this does mean a lot of fan speculation about Ura Zelda has been wrong. It was never going to be anything more than a dungeon replacement. Based on how Nintendo programmed things, it was only going to replace the dungeons because that's how the 64 disk drive hooks were set up. Files replaced our dungeons, dungeon maps, dungeon treasure chest icons for the maps, text, and staff credits.
Zeth had also sent me a bunch of screenshots and videos that he felt could shine a better light on the development that many people weren't privy to, so let's get into it. To start things off, Zeth had sent over a photo album containing a lot of development screenshots, beta restorations, model renders, animations, and in-game screenshots. I'll leave a link to it down in the description. In this album was also an in-game screenshot of the castle town that looks really janked, according to Zeth. He says it's because at the time N64 emulation wasn't perfect, so they thought things were working fine until the N64 emulation scene started to progress, and one of the beta plugins being used had shown them how off their community converter was. It had render depth issues, causing polygons to not be drawn in the correct order. Another issue they had run into was a texture mapping error that would mess up certain textures for seemingly no reason. This video is a walkthrough of the castle town they made for Project Ura. Some key things are that this is a fully 3D area, unlike the largely 2D box that Ocarina of Time uses. It was also a test play of the Z target mechanics, as they had used brackets instead of the triangles the original game used. They were also testing the wallet system, collisions, the Majora's Mask, Young Link, and testing the actors in the Castletown map. Based off this, I assume this was after the switch from the Ocarina of Time engine to the Majora's Mask engine, as they were having a big issue with loading actors into the Castletown map in the Ocarina of Time engine, but weren't in the Majora's Mask engine. This was also testing various other things as well, such as items and various animations. This video is a test for the texture animation used in the Unicorn Fountain. This video is an actor test that has custom code running for the first time, as they wanted to make sure they got the basics down before tackling the matrix system, according to Zeth. Zeth says he knows it's a lot easier from an outside perspective to say that they were being lazy or not working hard enough, despite that being the furthest from the truth. A lot of the behind-the-scenes development consisted of having to decompile the parts of the game they wanted to manually, creating content via hex code, as well as working within the limits of the early map converter they had at the time. An example of the issues they had run into was that the Ice Temple had no lighting, fog, or any of the fancy effects, as those didn't have any data written for it with the early converter, so Zeth had to do it all manually. The same case with the location name cards. No one in the community knew how any of that worked at the time. It was the same case with texture animation, cutscene data, shop data, and more. In Trailer 2, the team had restored an intro cutscene that was completely broken and left over in Ocarina of Time. For reference, this is the original opening used in Ocarina of Time. This is the unused intro that's in the game files. And this is the opening Zeth had made for Project Ura. The environment fog and lighting are all wrong, the skybox isn't set correctly, same with the time of day, Link's animation was broken, and there was a horrendous loud banging sound effect for some reason. All of that stuff was fixed in Trailer 2, and was put into Project Ura. And that's that, basically. As of now, Zeth along with Sakura, Shadowfire, and Too Cool from the original Project Ura team have actually made an Ura Zelda restoration, based off the information they were able to garner from the 2020 Nintendo Giga Leak. They also got help from Luigi Blood to create a physical version for the Blue Disc dev unit of the 64 disk drive. I'll leave a link at the very top of the fold to the release trailer, so please, go show them your support. Again, I just want to make it clear that I don't condone harassing anyone mentioned, no matter what. Leave them be. It's better left alone.